little bit about you, Bill, because we're going to do a little biography because you're our guy, and talk a little bit, Bill. We're on record, we're being recorded, about your mom and dad. Talk about your mom and dad.
Oh boy. Well, my mom and dad were children of the Depression. They came of age 1930.
Their names? What are their names?
My mother's name was Mary Walker. She was Pennsylvania Dutch, born in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, with no birth certificate.
Really?
Her father at times was a coal miner. Her grandfather was killed in a coal mine. And the family broke up when she was about 4 years old, and by the time she was 11, she was in what I always call it the equivalency of foster care. But the British would call it in service. She was an upstairs maid for people she lived with, and her job was to clean the chimney of oil lamps and empty chamber pots. And that's how she worked her way through high school. My dad was born on a farm here in Chautauqua County. Well, he was actually born in Jamestown on Steel Street in his grandmother's house.
His name?
His name is Ned Victor Parment. And let's see, he had 3 brothers and a sister. He spent part of his youth with his uncle Ivan. His mother was from the Powers family, and her name is associated with the same family as the Powers Funeral Home.
Right.
And that family basically came to Chautauqua County in 1815, and the first settler was a Baptist minister, and he started the first Baptist church in Blockville, and then they moved up to Panama, and that's where they resided. And he was a Revolutionary War vet, and so that family has deep roots here in Chautauqua County, and so that my grandmother, that was my great grandmother's name, Nellie Powers, and my grandmother was Mildred Powers, and she died in childbirth about 1930, I think. I have to look it up, actually. 30 or 31. And, of course, my dad, as I say, he lived with my Uncle Ivan out on a farm in the town of Harmony for quite a while in its growing up years. And then he, there weren't any jobs around here, so he got a job. He joined the Army in 1930, I believe, and spent 2 years in the Army. He was 14th Infantry, Panama Canal Zone. But in those days, officers still needed a mount. And so they found out he was a farm kid, so they sent him down to the stable. So his first job down there was shoveling horse manure, but he worked his way up, and he learned to shoe horses and that sort of thing. He got out of the Army, came home, still no jobs, went in the CCCs, spent whatever time in the CCCs. He's down in Mississippi building levees on the Mississippi, and then his unit got sent out to Lake Tahoe, and they had a camp on the Truckee River, and he spent one whole summer up in what then was called Squaw Valley. I know they changed the name, and I don't recall what they changed it to, which was wilderness area at the time, nothing up there. Well, then he finally got out of the CCCs. He drove a log truck in the Sierra Nevada. I mean, if you can imagine that, with no power steering and mechanical brakes. And he finally came back home because he was a little homesick, and he got a job with Weinstein's down here at the boat landing cutting scrap. And he worked that into a job with Lindy Air, I think, and he delivered oxygen and was settling around. And because he was touring around, he met my mother, who happened to be, at that time, waiting tables, the old Randolph Diner.
I'll be darned.
And so that's kind of my family's background. And they got married in '39. My dad saved up $80 somehow, went to the World's Fair in New York City on their honeymoon, came back broke.
Yep.
That time he was making $14 a week. And 1946, they bought a little farm out in Ellington, and that's what I grew up with. A little dairy farm in Ellington, West Hill. And I don't know how he ever saved the money to buy that farm, because he never went in debt.
Yeah.
He's one of these guys that
Cash only.
cash only. And when I was growing up, he worked. He was a welder by that time. And he worked down at Arnott Furniture, down on Dow, I guess it's Dow Street. And last 20 years he worked. He did that. He did some logging on the side and lumberjack kind of stuff, and ran that little dairy farm. Him, my mother, and myself. One of my jobs was get up and milk cows in the morning and come home and clean the barn in the afternoon. Not unusual for farm kids in those days. And so that's kind of the background I had.
You were born, what year were you born?
42.
42. Siblings?
I have two sisters. My older sister, Sally McCluskey, at one time was county treasurer and county controller.
Right.
She then worked as, after that, she didn't want to run for office again. She took a job as finance director for the city of Dunkirk for a while, and at one time she worked for the James Pendergast Library. I think. Anyway, when my folks passed, her daughter and son-in-law had situated in Springfield, Missouri, and so she moved down there about, I'm going to say it was 30 years ago now, I've forgotten. The other sister married a guy from Kentucky, Dickie Wakefield, and she'd gone to the University of Kentucky and studied heavy animal science, and she wound up moving to Kentucky, and she lived down in a place called the Knobs, which is a very convoluted territory like this, up and downhill, since about 1970. So that's the only siblings I have.
Dick Wakefield was a baseball player.
Well, that's Dickie's father. Yeah, Big Dick they call him.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
So
Big Dick was. I don't know if you ever met him, but he must have been 6'4".
Yeah.
Probably weighed 250.
Yeah.
Big guy. And I know Russ Dietrich told me at his wake. Well, we had the wake. They asked me to speak, and I did. And then I asked if anybody else wanted to speak, and Russ did. He said Big Dick had he and Big Dick had shingled a house one day, and then they had to go play ball, and Big Dick pitched both games of a doubleheader and won them both. Yeah, that's the same family.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So you grew up in basically Ellington on a dairy farm. Go to grade schools there and high school?
Yep. Graduated from Cassadaga High School in 1960. And I went to Ellington grade school, and I went to Faulkner till my senior year. And the senior year I went to Cassadaga, finished up at Cassadaga. So it was, and pretty typical. You know, everybody, my generation probably was the last generation that had, I don't know, maybe it couldn't be a majority, but a fair number of people growing up on farms. You know, today it's only about, I think, 5% of the American population lives on farms. But when my folks all grew up on farms, and they've been farmers for generations, right?
Was there, when you graduated from high school, was there a question whether you would stay on the farm or would you go get further education?
Well, there was no question I wasn't going to stay on the farm. I told my dad I didn't want to be a farmer, mostly because I didn't like milking cows. I didn't mind field work, riding a combine, combining oats, plowing, disking, all that sort of thing. I kind of enjoyed that. You're outdoors, building fence, milking cows 24/7, 365. No thanks. I just had no interest in doing that. And it's changed now. I mean, I think farmers now have 500, 600, 1,500 cows. They have hired help and they can actually take a vacation and maybe get away from it for a while. But when you've got 22 milkers, we had about 40 head of cattle, and livestock and whatnot, and, dried off cows. But you got to go down there every morning, 6 o'clock or 5:30, wherever it was, and you have to be back there in the evening, do it again. And I didn't want it first. So I told my dad that. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'm not sure. So I went to JCC first year. Didn't flunk out, but they put me on academic probation. I was never a good student. In my defense, I would say, I was working 40 hours a week at Johnson's Friendly Service and driving back and forth from Ellington 12 miles every day. I'd take classes in the morning, and I think I went in at 2 o'clock to Johnny's Friendly Service, and then I'd get off at 10 o'clock, maybe. I don't know. I closed the place up. I can't remember.
So just for the camera, what was Johnny's Friendly Service?
Well, it was a mobile station right next to the tracks there in Falconer, and owned by a guy named Johnson, and nice guy. So anyway, he was looking for help, and I went in and applied for a job, and he put me to work. I started work actually the day I graduated from high school. That afternoon, I was pumping gas, and I went to the ceremony in the evening, and I was there for about a year. That first year JCC, as I said, I was driving back and forth. I had an old Ford pickup truck and floorboards out of it, plywood in the bottom. Heater didn't work. Whew. You have the inside scraping the face off the windshield. And I remember I went in, I don't know. I'd worked there about a year, and I was making $1 an hour. I was the minimum wage at that time. And I went in one day, I was a little out of sorts, and I said to Johnson, I said, I got to have a raise or I'm going to quit. He said, he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I think I should get $1 a quarter. And he said, I can't pay you that. He said, but we work out the shift. I said, yeah, I'll work out the shift, but I'm done. Well, he came back around 2 o'clock or 3 in the morning, or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, I decided I'd give you $1.10. I said, well, I'll stay until I can find something better. And I did. 2 weeks later, I got a job in construction. And they were clearing it right away across the escarpment between, I don't know where it ran from, but it went across the Chautauqua Gorge there at the Hogsback Curve. And so I worked there clearing trees till we got that cleared, and then I went down by Prospect Station there and worked on another section until fall. But when I was at JCC, this is what kind of changed my trajectory, if you will. I had what they call a rehabilitation scholarship because I lost the sight in one eye when I was 8 years old. And that's a long story too. And actually, I had a kind of an interesting time here in the basement. I can get back to it. But anyway, the scholarship was supposed to give me rehabilitation, and so so they had a counselor. A counselor came to me. He said, "Well, what do you really want to do?" I said, "Well, I'd like to learn to survey." He said, "Oh, well, I'm in grade school for this." So they sent me to Farmingdale Ag and Tech down on Long Island, and I did learn to do land surveying and construction layout surveying more. And we had a curriculum called Highway and Bridge Construction. That's what I was in. Civil technology, highway and bridge, and the other side was buildings. And I took highway and bridge. But one time, I was one of the first, I think the first person cured of sympathetic ophthalmia. And I was in the Cleveland Clinic for 9 months. They shot me full of ECTH, didn't do anything. Finally, in about 1950, they synthesized cortisone, and they gave me that, and lo and behold, I got my sight back.
I'll be there.
And my doctor was a guy named Dr. Wetson. He had an office about the 8th floor of the Hotel Jamestown building. And he wanted me to come here to a meeting, I guess, of his colleagues. So we had a big luncheon downstairs, and I went there, and he was kind of showing me off as his prize pupil or whatever, you know. So, but anyway, yeah, I went to JCC, and I went down to Farmingdale 2 years. Got out of that, and then, a couple other construction jobs. The only time I ever worked in Chautauqua County really using the skills I learned at Farmingdale was I was the layout technician, you want to call it, survey engineer for reconstruction of the plank road, about 1960, probably 63 or 64, I've kind of forgotten now. But then I still had this desire. I thought I wanted to go to college, so I got accepted at Hofstra University. I got down there and rented a room, and I realized there's no way I could afford to do it. I couldn't get a job. I looked all over, couldn't find a job. So I said, that's it. I went up the Hudson to Poughkeepsie area. My sister was then working for IBM as a cost accountant for IBM. And I stayed with her for a while, and she said, why don't you try New Paltz? And by this time, I'd gotten a job in a bowling alley. I had a glorified title. I was assistant pin setter mechanic. And so I was working that, and I went over to the admissions office at New Paltz. I went in and I had my transcript and I gave it to him. This fellow, I never forget his, Mac Eckdorf was his name, kind of an avuncular fellow. He leaned back and he looked at my toes, and he leaned back in a chair like this. He says, Parment, he says, I don't think you'll make it at New Paltz, but we've got too many women and not enough men, so you're in. I was what they call a gender balanced beneficiary.
Yeah, the opposite of affirmative action.
So, but I fooled him. I did make it at New Paltz. I graduated a couple of years later. Met my wife there. We got married. Well, I graduated in March of '67. They had a trimester basis, or quarters or something like that. So I finished my work in March. And hung around for another couple of years, wait for my wife to graduate, and we got married in '69, so 56 years ago, I guess.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. You should congratulate her.
That's right. Right.
Condolences.
I have her number. I'll call her. That's great. So then, what drew you back here?
Well, Chautauqua County's always been home. I mean, it's just the rolling hills, the forests in the northeast. We all complain about the winter, but it's beautiful at times. It grinds you down over time, but of course my folks were still alive at that time, and they were still here, and I wanted to come back, and I was working for the State University as a facilities planner. Mm-hmm. And I got a chance to go work at the University of Buffalo. And it was a big deal. In between that, I graduated. I got a job at a big engineering company. I was working on Interstate Highway, Interstate 84, over the mountains between the Hudson River and Connecticut. 4 million yards of rock to take down. It was an amazing job. Anyway, after that, I got this job as a facilities planner for my old college at New Paltz State. And then I had the opportunity to go to Buffalo, where they had all the world's great architects. I mean, Bucky Fuller was there, and Gordon Bunshaft, White, all those guys were there. It was amazing. But I really wasn't happy living in the Buffalo suburbs, and so I started looking for work here. I got a job at the courthouse, and that was 1970, I guess. I went to the courthouse one day and asked if they had any openings, and Everett Neckers was then the personnel director. And they did have an opening for a planning technician, and they'd been open for 2 years because they were paying an abysmal salary, and they couldn't attract anybody that was qualified for the job. So he looked at my background, he said, I think you're qualified. Sent me over to talk to John Lensman, and I talked to John, and then he hired me. And it was a civil service thing, so they had to take a test, but you can be provisional until you get the test done. But anyway, the test was nothing to do with county planning. It was city planning. The test was city planning, but I got a book on city planning, read up on it, and passed the test, and I got the job in the courthouse. And I guess, as I said, the rest is history. I got drawn into politics, and
Well, you're going from city planning, working for John Lunsman. We should talk about John, because he certainly was a force of nature, and the county planner for many, many years. And so, was he influential in your life?
yes, in the way that he exposed me to a field of knowledge that I was able to use constructively when I was in public service. It's I think most people, I don't know what they think planners do. I don't know. Plan, I guess, right? But what you do is you analyze data a great deal. And John exposed me to the U.S. Census and the ways to analyze what's happening in an area based on the census. Housing stock, employment, marital status. It's all in the U.S. Census, and you have to get the detailed census to do it. But that plus geography and topography and all manner of data that you could collect and use it to make judgments that were reasonable and constructive. And so yes, he influenced me by giving me that exposure. And he was a very forward-looking person, and when I was there, he spent a lot of time planning sewer and water districts, county trails program, and things of that nature. Because he was fascinated, I guess you would say, with Chautauqua Lake, and he probably knew more about Chautauqua Lake than any person ever knew, including people today. I don't think anybody ever knew more about Chautauqua Lake than John Lunsford did. He was amazing. And he got me involved in some of that, too. For instance, we had a little charrette one time where we were up against a federal deadline for application for sewage or sewer treatment funding. Public Law 92-500, the Muskie Clean Water Bill. Right? And the window for application was closing, and we had.
Okay, so those watching, it's Senator Edmund Muskie, not to be confused with the fish Muskie.
Right. Anyway, so John says to me, this has to be done and filed. It was the North County Sewer District grant application for federal funding for their sewer project. So, I can't remember. It didn't take me very long, but I cobbled together an application, and I can still remember driving it up to City Hall in Buffalo, and they were receiving these things up in the City Council chamber, which is way up in the building. There's a big, I don't know if you've ever been there. It's like an auditorium almost, and so I got it up there and got it filed on the deadline, and they did get their application. Some of the other things John had me doing, well, I circulated and filed petitions for the first Ag Center in Chautauqua County, and the second one, I think, a long time ago. But it was a new opportunity that the state had created to have ag districts and give protection to farming in various ways. Basically, at that time, it was tax protection. Basically, if you're in an ag district, they can't tax you for more than the ag value of your property. Well, in Chautauqua County, particularly along Route 20, which is a big gravel bed that is an ancient shoreline of Lake Erie, it's very suitable for housing with septic systems. That's why if you go along Route 20, it's almost all populated. Route 5, not so populated because it's on shale.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, so there's these pressures of real property tax that were, the assessors say, well, look, you've got 10 acres, it could be 2 5-acre lots for a house, and housing sites are selling for, and this was putting a lot of pressure on the farmers. So by creating an ag district, they could only tax them for the ag value of the property. Yeah. There's other things now that are associated with ag district protections, but that was the purpose really at that time, was to give them an ability to continue farming without being taxed off the property. So I was involved in that, and then in the in Center District, I spent a lot of time working on modification of the grant application for the Center District, because the engineers that had put together the original layout had included a lot of lateral lines that didn't serve any property. And they were streets, but nobody, it's like, and if you ever look at a map that shows dedicated streets, that every community has dedicated streets that no one has ever lived on, right? It's just the way subdivisions were made or whatever. And and so I spent a lot of time taking out the surplus lateral lines, and by doing that, it salvaged the grant for the Center District. But I was involved in a lot of things. John had me, he always had me analyzing the lake, or doing, he wanted one time to see, because I was a surveyor, I could sort of read the Holland Land Company survey notes. They're up in the courthouse. Fascinating documents, really. There's a lot of history on them. And he wanted me to compare the Holland Land Survey lake shore with the USGS map lake shore to see if we could determine what the lake level would be minus human intervention. So I spent several weeks trying to figure this out, and in doing it, I came across a historical reference to a situation in 1812. William Bemis was hired to dredge parts of the outlet to improve navigation by some group. I forget the group. So he's navigating. He's starting to dredge, and what does he do? He discovers a post across the outlet. This is 1812. Well, what that told me right then was either the French or the Native Americans had done that, and so I don't think I could ever prove what the natural lake level was.
Wow, isn't that fascinating? Wow.
Yeah, and some of the things the lake can never be less than 1306 above sea level, because there's shale level in the Chautauqua River that would prevent the lake draining it. So at 1365, the old Board of Public Utilities here, their air intakes to cool the old coal-fired plant would suck air if it one big old 1365. So they had to have it up that high, but that's another long story. We got involved. The Agnes flood, we got some money to work on that. And John got this federal money. We didn't really have a lot of damage from Agnes. We did have some flooding around the lake, and myself and a guy named Ed Murphy, we spent a long time tracking around the lower areas of the lake, seeing who got flooded at 13.9.5. and that was considered to be the flood level. I think the flood record is 1313. But John decided to use this federal money that we were getting from the Agnes storm to, he established a lake level monitoring station at Bud Creek in Mayville, one in Bemis, one down at Celeron, and then there's an outfall gauge on the Chautauqua in Dow Street.
Yeah, fuck, yeah. I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, and so if you know what the lake level is and you know how much water is going down the Chautauqua, you can say, well, John always said you can't control the lake. You can influence it. But in that program, plus one of the items that Raleigh Kidder and I really got involved with, New Water Dam. Another story. With the New Water Dam, they could draw the lake down to, I think they draw it down to about 13.7 or something in the wintertime. Then when the spring freshet comes, it goes back up to 13.85, I think. I've forgotten the numbers. But since that's been installed, I don't think there's been any Chautauqua or lower lake level flooding. And that, the last, I think, storm that caused actual flooding was March of '76. I don't think they've had any since then. March of '76. The reason I kind of remember it was we had this terrible big rainstorm, ice storm, the night that Stanley and Dean got elected to Congress the first time.
That was a special election?
Yeah, in March of whatever the date was anyway. But the Water Dam, you know, it's like another project John kind of got me involved in, and you know, we knew it was inadequate, it couldn't be operated really well. Board of Public Utilities had a hard time operating it. And so I wrote a grant application and got approval for $400,000 for a new dam. And I got Raleigh Kidder interested when he was a member of the Assembly, and he got some member items for it. And because I'd run in successfully for Congress, I think it was in 74, I guess, I forgot now. At any rate, I knew he'd carry a little bit. So I got the governor's attention to the project, and we put together a federal grant, and Raleigh got some state money, and I think Kerry put some money in. We got a new Water Dam, so now they can operate it. And they got these lake level monitoring stations, plus the outfall, which is John Lunsman's contribution, and yeah. But I always, you know, I think about all those things. It's kind of like, whoo, long time ago.
Well, and just for the camera, John Lunsman, he did spend an awful lot of time on the lake. That was almost his baby. And he was going to write a book on the history of Chautauqua Lake. And he contracted cancer. And so in what he did, and it's to our benefit, the public, he did 10, I think, 1-hour sessions and video, the public access, and took his items and explained the history of Chautauqua Lake. And I've got that VHS. I put it up on YouTube. It's available. But it's terrific history of the lake, just as you said. Nobody knew more.
Well, and you know, I've been told that this is great watching, and I've got to dial it up and look at it sometime.
I put it up many years ago, and I think it's public access to. I don't want to say I'm the only one, but I had the VHS tapes, and I go, this is incredible knowledge of the lake. Because people ask about what's the lake, what's the history, what's this, what's that, all these numbers you've just given, why Dow Street, why this, why that, and he'd have the charts, he had everything he was going to use in the book, but he just videotaped himself instead, which was a brilliant contribution to his knowledge base. So he could get it out without having. He knew he didn't have the time to write it. Yeah. So that was John Lennon.
You know, the lake is fascinating. I mean, everything can be fascinating if you get into it. My grandfather used to cut ice for Fisher's Ice House in Mayville, and in summertime they'd load boxcars with ice to go to New York City for cooling drinks, I guess. If he wasn't doing that, he was delivering ice around the head of the lake up there. But he actually would harvest the weeds with an old sidebar mowing machine and a horse-drawn.
No kidding.
Right, and that was part of his job. And so you look out there, and there's a horse's head bobbing up and down, according to what my family's told me. And they'd mow the weeds so that the weeds didn't go up into the ice and ruin the ice.
I'll be darned.
And so I was telling that story to a fishing guide last summer. I brought my grandson up. We went fishing one day. And the guy says, "When was this?" I said, "Well, probably 1920. He said, "So we've had these weeds for over 100 years." I said, "Well, more than that." Probably more like 3,000-4,000 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is all of this time period, 1970. You sort of start working with the time period with the county,
Right.
and in sometime between then and 1974, where you actually ran for political office.
Yeah, it was, Greg, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I would recommend to anybody. When I got the job in Mayville, my dad told me, he said, "Hey, you better register the Republicans, you're going to lose your job." Well, I wasn't, it never occurred to me that he was correct, right? He said, "If you want to know about politics, go up and talk to your cousin, Paul Nelson." Well, Paul Nelson was a town supervisor, county legislator out of Mayville, and he was my father's first cousin, Blanche Parment Nelson's son. And so, we were wait a minute. Well, it never occurred to me that I should worry about my job. I was civil service, right? But I hadn't passed the test yet, by the way. So one day I went down to the basement and went into Dan Larson's office. He was the elections commissioner for the Democratic Party, and I said, "I don't know what you know about politics." I said, I'm kind of interested. And he said, "Well, what was your interest?" I said, "Well, I'd like to kind of get involved." And he said, "Well, you Democrat or Republican?" I said, "Well, I rolled in Democrat." "Oh, yeah." He says, "Well, you want to meet our candidate for the assembly?" I said, "Well, yeah, okay, who's that?" He said, "Well, there's a guy, his name's Rollin Kidder. He's going to be at Webb's Captain table for a little get-together tomorrow evening. Why don't you go down? Well, I'll introduce you." So I did. I went down to Webb's, and I can't remember the function, but it was a little coffee clutch or something, Met Raleigh, and so Raleigh says, "Hey, I'm going to drive up to the Buffalo Airport and meet Birch Bayh for an endorsement tonight. Do you want to go along?" And I said, "Oh, sure, that sounds like great fun."
He was the senator from Indiana, right?
Senator from Indiana.
Yeah.
I think he's the one that is responsible for Title IX of the Education Act that says you can't discriminate in sports against women and all that.
Yeah.
I think that's. Anyway, we drive up there, and Bayh is staying at a motel across from the Buffalo Airport. I can't remember the name of it. But so we go to the senator's room, and here I am. My first day in politics, I'm being introduced to a United States senator. I was like, "Whoa, this is really cool." So that was my first introduction.
I'll be darned, yeah.
And I worked that fall on Raleigh Kidder's campaign. He had just come back from Vietnam, and he'd won his primary to run for the assembly against Johnny Palillo, who comes from Portland. Well, he was still in Vietnam. He couldn't even home. He didn't get home in time to vote for himself. Anyway, and so I worked on his campaign. And of course, John Beckman, who was the incumbent member of the assembly at that time, a Republican, was unhappy that this newbie from the courthouse was working for his opponent. And so he got a hold of John Lunsman and Everett Neckers and said, "You got to fire him." So Everett Neckers calls John Lunsman and says, "Well, he's the only one that's passed the exam, but I haven't released his results yet, so you fire him, he's gone." Well, John, bless his heart, went to Jess Present, who was on the planning board at the time, and said, what do you think? And Jess Present said to John, is he doing a job? And John said, yeah, he's doing great. And so Jess told him, don't fire him.
Isn't that interesting?
So that was my first scrape. But I was a little bit knocked back by that. I mean, here I was. I just bought a house in Mayville. I had a mortgage. My wife was pregnant with her first child, and here these.
Your wife's name, by the way, is
Lynn.
Lynn. Yeah.
And here's these honchos from the courthouse trying to fire me. Well, so I decided to get involved big time.
So during that time, again, early 70s, the county executive would have been Joe Gerasi.
Well, he was, when I first was in Mayville, it was still the old Board of Supervisors. And they were under court order to reapportion, or to create districts. Judge Gaughan had said, you got to redistrict. Baker versus Carr, Reynolds versus Sims. You can't have a board of supervisors. You got to have districts. And I am trying to remember who the chairman of the board of supervisors was at that time. I don't remember. But it was a Republican-controlled board. Democrats had never been. They have maybe. I think there were 6 from Jamestown, maybe. So some of them were Democrats, not all of them, and a couple from Dunkirk. So it was a 36-member board, and I think they had 6 Democrats. And I got very involved in redistricting. And because I had some inclination, I guess, of data and census tracts and all that, I made several suggestions for people to draw the lines. And lo and behold, 1972, Democrats won the first county legislative race. And I think they had 15 of the 25. And they elected Joe Gerasi as chairman of the legislature. And then Raleigh Kidder and I, and by the way, Raleigh got elected to that board as well. Yeah, if I got the name, the dates right, I think, yeah. Raleigh got elected, and Joe Gerasi was the chair. And Raleigh and I convinced Joe Gerasi, or Gerasi convinced us, I can't remember just exactly. But we decided we needed a charter form of government. And they'd had a charter form committee that had suggested it before, and it got defeated. And it seemed to be the reason it was defeated was they had what reformers call a reform kind of government, where the chief executive officer was appointed. And the public really wanted an elected executive. And if you look at Chautauqua County, you realize the politics of Chautauqua County are bipolar, if you will. You get Dunkirk on one end and Jamestown on the other, and we're in the Mississippi watershed where we're sitting, but Dunkirk and the North Shore of Chautauqua County are in the other watershed.
Mm-hmm.
The Laurentian Divide is across the top of the ridge there,
right?
And it's always created this kind of a, if you hold a political fundraiser in Dunkirk, no one from Jamestown comes.
Yeah.
If you hold one in Jamestown, no one from Dunkirk comes. Right? It's that kind of a county. Well, that kind of a county under reform governments just doesn't work, because you need to have somebody that's elected to be able to bring consensus. If you have a homogeneous government or a community,
mm-hmm.
where everybody is pretty similar, then you can have a reform government with at-large elections, appointed executives, and so on. No one's debating. When you have something as diverse as Chautauqua County, it really needs an executive to bring that. So we formed a charter commission, and of course I got Joe to appoint me to the commission, and myself and a guy named Ellen Austin from Fredonia, principally wrote the county charter, and we wrote it with the elected county executive. And Bob Barber, who became a county legislator, and I think chairman of the legislature, wasn't he? And he was on the committee. He kept talking about an executive, or what do we call it? Administrative code. Well, this will have to go in administrative code. I said, well, okay. I wanted to keep the charter bare bones so everybody could understand what it was. And I created a legislature of 25 seats, 25 members, county executive, stripped down, very simple, and we were successful at getting that enacted, and that's still the form of government that they use today, which I could give you a critique of it, but I think that it's worked fairly well for Chautauqua County. There was a big push to reduce the legislature from 25 to 19. I think that was a mistake. The purpose of the 25 was to give everybody a voice, if we could. And 19 kind of shuts people out. If I were real active and wanted to make a statement about it, I'd probably tell you that under the 25-member legislature, we always had an African American on the board, both from the Democratic and Republican side of the aisle. Since they've gone to 19, there's no representation from the African American community. I don't know what the Supreme Court would say about that, but I know that you'd have a fighting chance to have the 19 members thrown out because it's a discriminatory basis. I don't know, maybe they wouldn't, but I don't think it was written to discriminate, but the effect is that there's not been a black member elected since they've gone to 19.
Yeah.
All, I don't know who all they are anymore, but they probably all look about like you and me.
I'm just thinking back as you were mentioning that with the John Champions and the, was it Lula Taylor? Was she a county legislator?
Yeah. Lula was a county
Was
legislature.
Vivian a county or a city? I forget.
Well, she was a county, and Vivian.
Yeah.
And before that, Peterson.
John Thompson?
No, I don't think John Thompson. He was on the city council.
City council.
Yeah. Can't think of Peterson's name. He was a business agent for the machinist.
Clarence Peterson.
Clarence Peterson. Yeah.
That's right. How we know this stuff. Fascinating. But at some point, Bill, you went from being a county employee, but you decided to take a leap, that you were thinking about statewide politics. Was there an aha moment in all of that?
No, not really. In fact, after I'd run for Congress and lost.
It was.
When is that? I always think it's funny. Other people might not, but teacher was talking about Congress in class one day, and my oldest son, about 5th grade, said, "Oh, my dad ran for Congress once." And the teacher was like, "Oh, what happened?" He said, "Well, my dad lost, but the other guy went to jail."
That's right. Hastings, to draw a name. A name you may not represent. James Hastings.
So I'd run and lost. And then, because Hastings had these legal problems, which frankly I was aware of because I'd been told by one of his staff members that they had it, but I couldn't corroborate it, so I never used it against when I ran against it. But anyway, Hastings resigns his seat, goes to the business council, and when he goes to the business council, one of the staff members in his office blows him into the FBI. The FBI investigates. He's convicted and goes to Elgin Air Base in Florida for a few months. I don't know. And so there's a special. And I say, well, wait a minute, I just, ran. No, they wouldn't pick me. They wanted a sure thing, so they picked Stan Lundeen. And a consolation prize for me was I got to run Stan Lundee's campaign. because I was the only one who knew the district. That's politics, right? So anyway, Lundin got to be the congressman.
Who had been the city mayor.
He'd been the mayor, city mayor, yeah, and then he went to the Congress. And at that point, I decided, hey, I'm done with this. This is wacky. So I decided to study for my professional engineering license. I had the requisite, what do you call it, experience. You need, I don't know what they now, but you have to have 5 years of experience and a degree and all of that. So I decided I'd hone up. I started going back to JCC, taking courses like geometry, not geometry, what it took, calculus for the second time, and a bunch of things like that. And I pretty much, I'd gotten off the state committee. I was a member of the state committee, Democratic committee. I'd gotten off from that, and so what did I do? Well, and then it really surprised me, actually. Raleigh Kidder decided to retire from the assembly and pursue private sector employment. And he told me because he had a growing family, he needed more money. The assembly was...
So he went to the dark side.
Yeah, I guess you say the dark side. But anyway,
If you were here, Raleigh.
He went out, started his own company, and so forth. And so that was, when I said, well, there were a lot of people encouraging me to run, a lot of people not encouraging me to run because they didn't think I could win. I think most of the people in Democratic circles didn't think of me as a particularly good candidate. They thought of me as kind of a bull in a china shop. And at times that probably was. But I'm not quite sure why I prevailed as the candidate. There were several qualified people that were being interviewed. But I think it was because Dr. Barone, who was the county Democratic Committee chair at that time, felt that I should be given the consideration because I didn't get their consideration to run in the special election for the House. And so they put me in the ballot box, and I was very, I ran against a quality candidate Dick Kimball. He was the mayor of Jamestown, and I don't know how much of this would be history, but 2 weeks before the election, the polls showed me 10 points down. And I was hurting in Jamestown. Of course, Democrats are always hurting in Sherman and mine on Front Street. But for Democrats to be hurting in Jamestown is not good. So I took 2 weeks off from work. I spent 2 weeks knocking on doors in Jamestown. And lo and behold, I carried the election by about 350 votes. Very close election. And then after that, it was always a struggle. But, being a Democrat in a Republican county means you really do have to work a lot more just to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, a member of the assembly, have second jobs. Maybe they sell real estate on the side, or insurance, or they're attorneys, or whatever. And traditionally, the state legislature is only in session for about 6 months. During the time I was there, because Speaker Silver and George Pataki, the governor, were fighting over education, we never got the budget adopted in March like we're supposed to. And I remember in 2001, the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, we still didn't have a budget. And of course, with the World Trade Center thing, that was the end of the argument. We went in the next week and did the budget. Well, we were there all that time. Every week we're down there. So that plus anytime you had an opponent, a Democrat in a Chautauqua County, Republican county, you really had to get out and knock on doors and work at it. So it wasn't a lark. I never had another job other than the assembly.
for about 17 to 18 years worth of, you were in the assembly.
I tell people I was doing 25 to life, but they gave me time off for good behavior. I was there for 28 years.
28? Wow, 28. Again, my math has got to be better. 28 years. Well, during that time period, you were, for the benefit of Chautauqua County, and I think my perspective, one, you did a heck of a job for our county, but you were also an assemblyman in an assembly that was Democratic.
Correct.
And we had a state senator representing us who was a Republican at a time when the Senate was Republican.
Right.
More or less.
Right.
And we were I like to think Chautauqua County was the beneficiary.
No, there's no question about that, and that's something I think the public here fails to grasp. They don't believe it. I don't think. Maybe they do. I don't know. But going all the way back to '65, in '65, there, because of the Johnson landslide, Lyndon Johnson landslide over Goldwater, the Assembly was briefly a Democratic-led body. But in the next election, Republicans became, so that would have been '67, right? And at that time, John Beckman, I think, was a member of the Assembly, a Republican, and just President was the senator. So you had, and a Republican governor with Nelson Rockefeller. So there you had the trifecta, in a sense. And so from '67 until my retirement in 2010, however many years that is, that's what, 40,
3 years, yeah.
is it 43 years? Yeah. Chautauqua County had the benefit of having a member in the majority in the Assembly and in the Senate. And that was always paired with a governor that could be of either party. And for many of those years, we also had a Republican or Democrat in the House of Representatives and generally in the U.S. Senate. So for odd combinations, we always had that. And I was very fortunate in the Assembly that I had Republican Senate colleagues that I could work with. They were good people who were dedicated to public service. Just President was a guy that just really believed in public service. And we were of different generations, different political parties, but we represented the same people. And when there was things to get done for Chautauqua County, generally speaking, we could get it done. Same thing with Pat McGee. Pat McGee succeeded just President when he passed away. And then when Pat passed away, Kathy Young. So I worked with 3 Republican senators. And generally, we might disagree about politics. Politics is kind of a thing where you're trying to, get people to vote for you. I guess you'd say it that way. But basically, we didn't have many disagreements about what was good for Chautauqua County. If we had an opportunity to help Chautauqua County, we would, set aside the elections. When you're in an election, you have to, cheer for your guy, right? Well, we all understand that. But there was never any negative campaigning back and forth. And at any rate, so on a lot of the things that happened in that period happened because we were represented in both houses by people in the majority who cared about what was happening, and we got a lot of things done.
Microcosm, Ben, we're here at the Robert H. Jackson Center, Kappa Theater, and it was started in the year 2001. We're now on our 25th anniversary. And our first executive was Dan Bradbury, but only after 6 months he passed away. shortly thereafter, Raleigh retired from his assembly, private business, and he said, I want to kind of like to get into something I really enjoy, history, and still stay active, and he became our executive director. And hence that, given all this newness here and relationships, because we knew we needed assistance from Albany, and his relationship with you, and relationship at the same time with Pat McGee, and then subsequently Kathy, all of that was very much part of the pivotal part of the beginnings of this place. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, at some point, probably Raleigh gave you a call and says, hey, you don't know much about this place, but would you like to know about something? I only can imagine a phone call. I wish he were sitting here so I could ask him. But I'm curious, do you have memories of any of that kind of introduction?
Well, I was trying to think this through after you invited me to come for the interview, because that was 20 years ago anyway, but when I got involved with your project here. And I couldn't clearly remember how it all worked, to tell you the truth. It was kind of like, then I sort of stepped back on it. And Raleigh and Dave Shepard, who work for me, they're great friends, you know.
Okay.
Talked to me about the Jackson Center and getting involved in it, and I was a little gun shy, to tell you the truth, at first. And I watched it, and I'm not quite sure why they did this, but the leadership in the Assembly and the Senate decided to create these programs. One was for economic development, the other one was for health care. And I can still remember, Shelley Silver called me, he was the Speaker of the Assembly, and he said, Bill, you interested in this healthcare money? I think you ought to be interested in economic development. I said, well, you tell me. He said, well, if you take the economic development, I think I could do better for you there than I would in the healthcare, because New York City, all those, they've got all kinds of hospitals, and the legislators are very involved in them and so forth. So, okay, that's what you think. So this economic development program had to be a capital program.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that was right up my alley. I very seldom got member items, they call them, inserted into the budget for anybody's salary. Partly because I always thought that if the group couldn't raise the money to pay the help, they probably weren't going to make it anyway. But the big nut to crack was always the capital investment, what they needed for capital. And so over a period of time, I was able to access a considerable amount of money, and at least I thought it was considerable. Probably back, it doesn't sound like much now today after the last few years of inflation, but it seems to me, as I remember, for the Jackson Center, we were able to get about $1.3 million in state funding, and I think it came in 3 tranches. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because
Tremendous memory.
I was trying to put this together.
Because I know that. I mean, I know those aspects, yeah. I'm not sure how that happened, but it happened.
Well, the reason, because I also was able to get state funding for the YWCA rehab, and that was a little over $1 million. I think about $1.2 million, and here it was $1.3 million. But then, and that was something I kind of did without involving the state senate. This is where the money was put together, right?
Right.
But then, down at JCC, I teamed up with Pat McGee, Senator Pat McGee, to get $1 million between the two of us, $500 from me, $500 from Pat McGee, for the Manufacturing Technology Institute, they call it MTI. And subsequently, I was able to get them a lot of machinery money. I don't know, probably another, over a period of time, $1 million. And but that's how that money came about. It was kind of at the discretion of the member. You had to passed muster with the state controller, as I remember. But here you had a project that looked like, to me, a good investment for the community. And so that's what we did. And you, I'm sure you had a lot of other sponsors as well. I know you had Carl Kappa was your big founding sponsor.
Betty Lene.
Betty Lene, yeah. And I know Senator McGee got some money for the windows we talked about earlier. That who the Historic Society or whatever it is they want us to do.
Well, I mean, I'll pause for a second because I think I'm just going to add this because this is a history lesson too. What I remember about the windows, because there's 130 or 40 windows, and it just leaked like a sieve, and that was one of the reasons the Scottish Rite Consistory got out of business. They just couldn't pay the utility bill, and so we knew we had to handle that. A single pane; these were single pane wooden windows, and at the same time. We had been eligible. I knew this because I'm hustling things all over the place, every direction possible. That we were eligible to become a historically designated building. I mean, the city had done its analysis, and I thought that'd be cool. It's ego to be a state or a national historically designated building. I felt that was good. I was given a lesson under no uncertain terms by Don Blomquist and others, saying that's the worst thing that could happen. Because we got to do a lot of renovation in this building. We need a lot of capital improvement. And if you got a designation, the state agency, becomes very much your best, worst entity. And so that was one thing. So that stopped. Boom, I have a file, it ended. Boom, do not consider anymore. And then Raleigh was working with Hope's Windows, Frank Farrell. And Frank got a design of a triple pane metal window that would look identical to the wooden pane, single paneled. But it cost a lot of money, like I forget the number, $150,000. And we didn't have the money for that. But, that entered other people to assist us and all that. And Raleigh, in his persuasiveness, convincing Frank Farrell to kind of put this on a delayed payment plan. And, Frank, this is good for you, Frank. And it did. He loved it. And it happened. So the window was a big factor early on because we knew we had to save the building to protect utilities. You're absolutely right. And capital, because this building, the ceiling was falling in. There was a whole lot. So my memory, again, I know you and Raleigh were having the detailed conversation, but there were 3 tranches and 100 or 50, kind of like 50, 50, and 30. I may be guessing, but
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And 30 was the basement. The final piece of the puzzle was the basement, and I know that because we actually had an event. But that would not have happened but for Bill Parment. And I just want to state publicly, there's no one person who gave us more money or made available through member items and other connectiveness than for the Jackson Center than Bill Parment. Nobody. 0. You're number one, numero uno. And so I thank you on behalf of the Jackson Center. I thank you for that.
Well, you got to remember, it wasn't my money; it's the taxpayers' money. But I was the instrument of delivery, I guess.
There's a term in the legal business, the old but-for rule. But for you, we don't get it. So that I appreciate, and I appreciate that with the way your relationship was with the speaker, Sheldon Silver. You were able to get his ear when maybe others would not have been able to get his ear.
Well, that's probably true. And of course, they also knew that they didn't need to fear any kind of scandal at the end of that. Unfortunately, some of the monies that were dispersed from some of these funds that we had wound up in very questionable circumstances. And they knew here, if I said, look, this is an outfit that you can put your money in there and we're not going to have any embarrassment to it, they believe me. And that's true. And I probably, I was thinking about it, the Chautauqua uh, uh, corridor, I'll call it. I had projects going all the way from the South Center Sewer District plant to McCree Point to the Third Street Bridge to the Warner Dam to the YW to the Jackson Center down to the Roger Torrey Peterson Center, the Blackstone Wind Tunnel, the SKF reheat facility. Uh, and there's, people could say, well, we didn't like the project, but no one could ever say there was any hint of scandal in it.
One of the things I remember, and you should take this as a real sense of pride, is when Raleigh and I, we'd have daily conversations. Usually at 7 a.m. Some crazy idea, and conversations came up, and you'd say, well, maybe I could reach out to Bill Parment. But we also knew that it was never just a phone call saying, Raleigh saying, hey, we would like to have $500,000 for X, Y, and Z, and somehow it happened. We knew that 1, you had to be convinced. 2, you were making a site visit. 3, you were doing your due diligence. 4, all of that was happening. So we knew that the case had to be made to you, because that's how you work. That was your MO. And that was an amazing, as a public servant, you are to be credited for that.
Well, that's probably because of my background in public works. And, I worked on some big jobs. I told you, Interstate 84, power line, buildings for the county, roads and bridges. And part of that was to assess, in my mind, whether it was a worthwhile project. And I had kind of a 3 R's, I'd call it. Was it reasonable, responsible, and I forgot the third R. Relative error.
Huh?
In surveying, they call it relative error. If you do a traverse, 15, you go out, you turn an angle, you go 200 feet, you turn an angle, you come back to the beginning, you've created a polygon that should add up to 0 defection, right? Well, it's almost impossible to do even in first degree surveying, but when you get done, if there's an error, you distribute the error all the way around. It's called relative error. Well, that kind of hype that up to a point of, if it's a $1 million project and they're asking for $10, so what? The relative cost is nothing, right? Now, if it's $1 million project and it's a $950,000 mistake, that's serious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not exactly Einstein's theory of relativity, but there's a relative nature to how you assess these things. And when I looked at, 2 cultural institutions here, Robert Jackson Center and the Roger Torrey Peterson Center, my sense was that these had an opportunity for long-term benefit to the community and some economic development value. I would say that both of them were kind of long shots on the economics, but they were cultural additions. And
here we are, I guess 25 years later. Do you have a sense of this? Have you followed us? Have you followed the Jackson Center?
Well, I do because I get your email.
Yeah.
But I think I've been out of town for quite a while. I lived in Ithaca for 10 years, and then the last 4 years I lived in Omaha, Nebraska. And currently we're building a house in North Harmony across the street from where I lived for 36 years. And so I'm back in town. But the time that I've been gone, my only way to kind of follow it, once in a while I would see articles in the paper, or always kind of hoped that they'd have some kind of a international cachet or something. But that's what you guys got here, and people are still interested in it. And last year I wrote a book about the war trials in Japan. It was out I can't remember the name of the book anymore, but the tribunal there was a military tribunal, and basically Douglas MacArthur was the overseer, I guess, and it had the book at least described that as a much less successful endeavor. They had dissension on the court, and it brought out some of the Japanese rationale for having attacked into China and others, the resentment or reaction to Western imperialism is what they were claiming.
Right.
And but they had considerable dissension on the board, so it didn't come out to be as prominent as the one. I think I told you earlier. I went to Nuremberg one time when we were traveling, and I went to the courthouse there, or whatever they call it. And it's pretty impressive to go through it. It's kind of like awe-inspiring, you know. It's kind of like history really happened here, and you know, you think about these towering people, figures like Jackson, interviewing Goebbels or
Gary,
Herman Gehrig, and you know, just kind of wow, kind of you know. Of course, I was alive at the time, but it's ancient history to most of us, I guess.
you're a little young. So, you know, here, certainly the first 15, 20 years of our existence, we spent a lot of time on Jackson, the biographical, his legacy, and there were still a few people alive who worked with him, knew him, firsthand knowledge. And we interviewed hundreds of people. That's what I enjoyed doing. And so that's kind of archivally done in here. And with the passage of time, that is no longer an opportunity. But that still doesn't mean that we've had at the Chautauqua annually, all of the chief prosecutors of all the subsequent tribunals, Rwanda, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, they all come here. So we have this legacy, this international law legacy. And currently this year, under the leadership of our president, Kristen, and program committee, they're monthly doing programs in collaboration with Nuremberg, with the international law, with a variety of universities all year. And if nothing else, while you're back, we'll make sure you get the list. It's quite remarkable.
It'd be interesting for me to dig back into that body of law. I really haven't I haven't spent time reading about international law in a long time. My older son has a degree, a master's degree in comparative and international law. He might be interested.
Yeah. So now that you're back, we now know how to get a hold of you, and I'm sure we'll make sure that maybe we'll get a refresher course with you and Raleigh, and you know, because Raleigh, he'll show up, and the senior members. I don't want to say older members, senior members of our advisory group.
You know, one of the things I was going to, you just sparked in my mind. Former mayor of Jamestown. He worked in the Treasury Department.
Oh, Tracy.
Who?
Sam Tracy.
No. He worked in the Treasury Department in the Roosevelt administration.
Oh.
Why can't I think of his names? Because I'm too old to think names anymore. We'll go over here on by the moose. Anyway, he told a story about walking through the park one day and seeing Jackson and saying, "Oh, what you up to?" And Jackson said, "Oh, he's working on something, Lend Lease or something." Do you know that story?
I know the story, and I want to attribute it to Bratt, Frank Bratt.
He was a supervisor from Chautauqua.
Yeah. Well, I've heard Raleigh tell the story. And so, yeah, about somebody over in Baker Park. The way the story goes, I've been told that 1940, Jackson was trying to justify, for the benefit of the president, how to do this without the consent of Congress. And that was the game. So you, Mr. Attorney General, you figure it out. You give me the legal justification. And somehow, during that break, he came to back to Jamestown, and was sitting on a bench at Baker Park, by the Prendergast Library.
Yeah.
And somehow, somebody that we're trying to talk about, I remember, saw that. And you're right, that's the story. And anyways, nobody can quite. We've had John Barrett, we've had other guys, trying. Can you confirm all this? Does anything Jackson ever wrote, anything that's in his files, kind of say that? Because it's a great thing to say. It's a great piece of urban legend that somehow the legal justification for the Lend-Lease ended up being inspired by Robert Jackson sitting on a bench in Baker Park in Jamestown here. I'd like to.
Well, I would be really interested to know the interconnectedness of some of these things. But as Attorney General, I've got to believe that Jackson must have been involved in the Agricultural Adjustments Act of 1936. In the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 36, and all the amendments, and there's still big bodies of law in effect because of that. And he wrote the opinion holding that part of the Agricultural Adjustment Act said that Congress could regulate how much wheat a farmer could grow. I've forgotten the name of the case now. But it was brought out again when Obama wanted to tax people for not being part of Obamacare. And I've always wondered what his involvement was in formulating that policy. I suspect it was probably greater than you might expect.
He clearly was in Washington at that time. The case you're talking about is called Wickland.
Yeah.
And that was brought up. Everybody assumed that case would be incredibly pivotal when that went before the Supreme Court on the Obama matter. It did not. I mean, they were wondering whether that would be overruled. There was a whole lot of conversation. I remember that conversation. That's all I remember. But you bring up a good point. Where was he? Was he really there at the formulation of the act? Was he there also when the opinion was, obviously he was there when the Wickland case? Where does this all tie in? And the other piece of the puzzle is in Sinclairville, the guy who was intimately involved in the Roosevelt cabinet was Rex Tugwell. Rex Tugwell, who was a Democrat from Sinclairville, whose son, Frank Tugwell, is still alive, and I'm trying to get him here.
Oh.
I like that kind of...
Tugwell, he's the guy who became governor of Puerto Rico.
Exactly.
One of those trivia questions about Chautauqua County. What Chautauqua County statesman was governor of Puerto Rico?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have subsequently tracked down, where it's way off course here, but I went to the Library of Congress and did some serious tracking down of a few speeches that was on behalf of Tugwell, just to have his voice. He's a Chautauqua County guy, Roosevelt, contemporary of Jackson. And yet over time, just in the dustbin of history, I mean, nobody talks about Tugwell unless you're a true historian.
I forget why he got pushed out of the brain trust. He was a conflict of one of the guys there.
Yeah, that's...
And so he sent him aside, and
Senator of Puerto Rico?
FDR put him in charge of Puerto Rico.
Which he did great things on. I mean, people in Puerto Rico hold him in high esteem.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Good to know that.
So that 3 or 4 years that he was there, whatever he instituted was really well received. I've done a little bit of research on that, and I want to do an event for no real reason other than to, at least for one day, bring up the name Tugwell.
Yeah.
I did it on Torget. I did it on Bainbridge Colby. I did it on a few of these people who are really big deals for a period of time and soon to be lost.
Well, I always wanted to go look at Dan Reed's papers. I never got around to it. I was in Ithaca. I know they're at Cornell University. And part of the reason is that, and probably Raleigh Kidder's told you the story, his dad grew too much wheat one year. And the federal guys came down and said, you can't use this wheat. So Elliott, Raleigh's father, put it in the bin, kept it, and challenged and lost. And finally, Raleigh, sometime later, had to clean out the bin, and because it had gotten moldy, he got rash on his hands. You should ask him about it. But what happened was Raleigh's father, who was a Republican town supervisor, kind tone, went to Dan Reed, who served 44 years in U.S. Congress and was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee during the Eisenhower administration, amended the law because of the protests that Elliot Spitzer made. And I always wanted to go down and see if I could find the letter from Elliot Spitzer to Reed or
Elliot Kidder.
Or Elliot Kidder,
Yeah.
yeah. Elliot Spitzer, another guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Another Elliot, no. Yeah, Elliot Kidder. I never agreed with that opinion. The Commerce Clause says that Congress can regulate interstate trade. It doesn't say that Congress can regulate how much a farmer's wheat can grow. If they wanted to say that Kansas could only sell 400 million bushels of wheat into the international market or into the interstate market, they could do that. But I don't think they could tell a farmer how much he can grow. I never agreed with that opinion. I was a big fan of Jackson because of his opinion about Pledge of Allegiance, which probably wasn't very popular in most of this county anyway. But I don't think his decision about wheat was very popular in this county either. Yeah. But I just always, they used to regulate how much oil could go into interstate commerce. They bottled that up for years to keep the price of oil ahead of production costs. They could produce so much oil in Texas and Louisiana that they literally would exceed their production costs, and so they regulated that for a long time, interstate. But they never told any one driller, well, you can't drill. Yeah. It was amount that could be, and of course, my remembrance is a lot of bootlegging of that oil at that time. And so I suppose you'd get bootlegging. But I always kind of wondered about that decision. And I always wondered if you could find some connection between Elliot Kidder and Dan Reed and see what they did. But Raleigh always told me Dan Reed got the law changed.
Well, all of that, that's going to lend itself to a lunch at some point between you, me, and Raleigh. I'll throw the question out and get out of the way. And that's the kind of stuff that, is interesting. I'll also ask John Barrett about the whole AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Act, Jackson's involvement in that, the Wickland. Was there, was he, where was he in all of this? Because now you brought up a curiosity because it did come back. I remember when it was this discussion, almost a flashpoint, if you will, when that argument before the Supreme Court. Everybody was starting to talk about Wickland. And I had to read Wickland because I hadn't even read.
Robert struck that tax. I've forgotten why. I just had forgotten to read the opinion. Maybe I didn't read the opinion.
Well, he felt it was a taxation. But it was really a fine point. I mean, it was a stretch. It was a stretch. But nevertheless, that's where he got it. Oh man, Bill, you're just a fountain of conversation. And
well, I don't get a chance to talk to people very much anymore. It's kind of, me and my wife. And
well, she keeps you on the straight and narrow. Lynn's she's the real deal.
What did I say? 56 years?
Yeah.
I've forgotten now. I have to start and count on my fingers anymore. But we've enjoyed ourselves.
Well, we kind of wrapped this up because I've taken a lot of your time, Bill. But here we are in the Kappa Theater. Is there a sense of your involvement, legacy with the Jackson Center? Here we are now, 25 years. Because of what you did, frankly, we're still existing.
Well, I don't know what I would be able to do for the Jackson Center. I certainly would like to see it thrive. It's always possible that you come up with an idea of something that would be helpful. I just think that what you have to do is kind of keep alive the Nuremberg thing, because it has world effect. And, it's one of the, you can't just get everything packaged the way you'd like it. But Jackson obviously was in a situation where he had something that he was required to accomplish, and he did it. And I suspect that to some extent he wasn't completely happy with it. When they had the conference in London, he had to accept the fact that they weren't going to be putting Joe Stalin in the dock, And Joe Stalin killed more people than Hitler. And, we think World War II started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. No one ever says 2 weeks later, Russia invaded Poland. And if you read Applebaum's book, Bloodlands, in Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, 14 million people died.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we now know that the Katyn Forest massacre, 10,000 Polish officers, was done by the Russian army. In Jackson, who always, it seemed to me, took a practical course to make progress, knew that if they were going to have a trial to try the German war criminals, he just, okay, we have to accept what the reality is. And I think that's kind of a mark of him, in a sense of the doable, I guess you'd call it. How would you confront that? I mean, you're at the conference in Russia, and our ally Joe Stalin is Joe Stalin, and he starved millions of people in Ukraine during the 30s. He purged his army corps, invaded Poland, and yet had to deal with him as an ally.
Sure.
Tough to do.
That kind of, he's hard to categorize, but in one sense the term pragmatic comes up when you think of Jackson and his policies.
Yeah.
He had to be pragmatic.
Right.
How do we, what's the means to the end? Not necessarily, is it idyllic, it's just the means.
Well, and I suppose that in that regard he'd be compared to Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Holmes's tenure on the court was somewhat like that, although he had some divergences that I probably would find were inexplicable to me. But he basically thought of it as an organic thing that changed with the times and the people, and that was basically what Jackson did too. I think he didn't think it was a straitjacket. I think Raleigh's favorite comment is, the Constitution is another suicide pact.
Right. No question, no question. This has been so much fun, Bill. Honest to gosh. And again, on behalf of the Jackson Center, I don't know that we'd be sitting here talking about it. There were obviously many people were players, but at the top of this brew of people who made this a possibility is Bill Parment.
Well, thank you. I hope it continues for a long time, and I see no reason why it wouldn't. I mean, it's got a germ of truth here that can be used for the ages.
Thank you. This has been great.